On this week's episode of the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss James Franklin's presser from Tuesday afternoon, go over some of the non-conference scheduling and James's ideas for those moving forward, and preview the game against UMass on this week's episode of the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State football beat reporter for the Sunday Daily Times. Joining me, as always, Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. Audrey, it was an eventful Tuesday.
Was it Tuesday? I'm still trying to get my days straight coming off the
Yes.
idle weekend. I feel like it's one of those just been nice to get a couple days away, recharge a little bit. But then we're back at it. Although I'll admit it does feel weird with Penn State playing UMass this week. It kind of feels like a double bye, John. I know this is not what James Franklin wants to hear. If he is a listener of this show, he does not want to hear that we are
That's
looking
right.
ahead to Ohio State. But it very much kind of feels that way to me. Does it feel that way to you? You still in idle week mode?
Yeah, it's tough to come out of the bye week. I don't want to say this early because it's not that early, but with a non-conference game right after it, it does feel
It's
weird.
weird.
I always joke that during football season, every day's Wednesday because you just constantly feel like you're in the middle of the week.
Yeah.
But then you get a week where you're not doing as much, and then you come right back in, and it's just not as busy of a week. There's not as much to talk about with a matchup that Penn State should handle easily. One where they are massive favorites, and we'll talk about that later. I don't know. It feels like you said, like a second bye week. And to some extent, the press conference looked a little bit like that today, a little smaller crowd than the media
Really
contingent.
small crowd. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by that. I'm not gonna lie. It felt like there was less than 10 or 15 people in the seats. The crowded left side where we always sit was about the same as always. But
Little sparse on the right side today.
yes, it was.
I
But it was an
no,
interesting day.
I think it was one of those days where we're getting back into it. We will hear from Penn State's players the way it kind of falls this week. We'll hear from more players on Wednesday. So Tyler Jazansky was our only player that was available today. So not a ton of player insight just yet this week. But that'll be coming later on in the week. So yeah, it very much feels like they're kind of shifting gears. James Franklin was asked today kind of what they accomplished during the bye week. And John, we heard my favorite buzz phrase again. It was a week full of self-scouting. It was a time to scout ourselves. We heard that a lot and we hear that every idle week, and it's true because that's what these coaching staffs do, and they have to, as James Franklin told us last Wednesday, it's like you have to cut yourself open. And then I was after that, I was like, I don't want to know what's inside, what's not inside. I'm just going to let it there. But that's how you kind of come up with this analysis, and of course, with everything gearing up for Ohio State, it's easy to overlook UMass. At least for us and everyone else talking about this program, writing about this program, it's easy to do. But that's obviously not the focus internally. I will say, John, one other element of this week that I think is completely overlooked, and rightfully so. Did you know it's homecoming this weekend?
It's very funny you mentioned this because I saw your tweet about the Generations of Greatness uniform.
Mm-hmm.
I think you tweeted that
They're
yesterday or
wearing
Monday.
those. Yeah, they're wearing those on Saturday.
Yeah,
Which
and I was like, oh,
I
oh
didn't know
yeah.
if we knew that or if I just forgot that or yeah.
I'm pretty sure we knew that, and I'm also pretty sure that I had completely forgotten because it
Mm-hmm.
is it's UMass. You know what I mean? Like this is a game that they're going to win handily, one that they shouldn't a team that they shouldn't struggle with. Uh, I mean, those uniforms are cool. I've always liked the Generations of Greatness uniforms.
What's
I
your
stand by
favorite
that.
part of those? Favorite part of those uniforms?
I think it's the socks and the shoes. The white
Socks?
shoes
I
are
don't,
really nice.
what are the socks? Are they
The
striped? I don't
stripes
even
on the
know.
socks, yeah, and but it's
I
really the
think
shoes. Wearing white shoes, I think, are really, really clean with those
because
uniforms.
you're a big shoe guy in
I
general,
am,
John.
I
Don't
am.
don't let this podcast fool you. I am not the person here with all the shoes. That is John. I
We don't
own
need to
probably
take a
like three
tour.
pairs of sneakers.
We don't I own, 6 that are in my down by my front door or my garage door, and then probably another 45 in my closet. Uh,
Insane, insane.
yeah, listen, I like shoes. I like
Do you
Jordans.
just
I like
wear them once, not wear them? Like, what's
No,
the
so
deal?
I'll wear shoes a bunch, and then I'll just take them out of rotations. My Jordans, I generally keep in rotation no matter what. I try not to wear them if it's, ever raining or anything like that. I have
Which
certain
that
shoes
happens
that
all the
are
time in state college
I
where
know
places
it's
have great
tough.
weather. Yeah.
It's very tough, but I try to rotate. I try to keep the shoes rotating. I have some that are very old, that I've taken out of rotation because I don't want to damage them or anything like that. But no, there are, and listen, I'm not stopping getting them anytime soon either. Every time I find a shoe that I like, I end up getting it. So that is not going anywhere.
We
But
all
yeah,
have
no,
our vices, John, and if
oh,
that's
and
the
yeah,
worst, that's
right. Yeah, the shoes are definitely mine. But those uniforms, like I really do think, and no one's gonna want to hear me say this. I think their regular uniforms would look really nice with white shoes. Like I just think the white shoes look a lot cleaner
yeah.
and they look a lot nicer. They make guys. It's weird. They make guys look faster. I remember when Saquon
Yes.
Barkley ran back the kick return, he just looked faster because he had white shoes on.
And that is something that every year it seems like players are asked, or every year that they've worn these Generations of Greatness uniforms, they're asked, like, kind of, what's your favorite part? And every single time, the white cleats are a hit. Like, that is always the one kind of thing that players have said as long as I've been covering them. I will admit, John, I am not good when it comes to uniforms and uniform tweaks and noticing, like, oh my gosh, this team added a logo to their jersey or they're wearing this on their socks. Like, I just do not care. Like, I genuinely don't care what they wear. Very unpopular take that is not going to sit well at all with the fan base. I loved when they had the names on the back of the jerseys. From
Oh,
a
I do too. It
selfish
makes
perspective,
Yes, it makes our job
right?
so much easier.
Because I mean, you got the duplicate numbers, and there's so many times where you're trying to say,
Guys on
especially
special
on special,
teams.
yes, it's awful. And like, we're trying to track snap counts and look at these things, and it's like, wait, is it this guy? Is it that guy? We're so high up in the press box. Like, selfishly, the names on the back were fantastic for us. The thing I like most about these Generations of Greatness uniforms, numbers on the helmet, I think is a really cool. Again, fans are not
Also
going to
very
like
nice.
any of my uniform takes, um, but I think that's really it's a nice look. Now, John, I looked at this the other day. Their record wearing these Generations of Greatness uniforms, not the best. Do you recall what I will say is the most iconic game that they've worn these uniforms?
I do not. Was I on the beat for this? That's the real
I
question.
don't I think you were here. Iconic, and I'm saying this really sarcastically, the 9 overtime game they wore the Generations of Greatness
I
uniforms.
d Honestly, like that, I
Were you
blacked
you
out
were
that
here? Yeah,
game.
you were here for
Yeah,
that.
that was
Yeah.
I do not I refuse to remember any of that. I remember the 9 overtimes, of course. I remember guys going back and forth down the field. I have, decided to just omit that game from my memory forever for my own sake. Taking up too much space on the hard drive, don't want it up there, don't wanna waste my time thinking about
You know
that
what? Because
game.
I think
I'm sure
that
Penn
was
State
the
fans feel the
game.
same way.
I'm sure. I think that was the game where they also had, like, the diamonds in the end zone, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, no, I do
That
remember
looked
that. Okay,
cool.
that makes sense then, that's
I don't
why,
know if
yeah.
they're doing that this week or not. Like, I don't know if that I don't recall hearing or seeing if they're doing that this weekend. But that was one of the great things. Here it is. I just pulled it up. This is the sixth time that they're wearing the Generations of Greatness uniforms in the last 7 seasons. Penn State debuted these uniforms, which, of course, if you're new here, they're a mix of several eras of uniforms together. So it's not going to look drastically different, except maybe for the white shoes, the numbers on the helmet. But they wore them in 2017. Penn State won against Indiana. 2019, they beat Purdue. 2020, they wore them and lost to Iowa. 2021, they wore them in the 9 overtime game that lost to Illinois. And then, of course, 2022, they wore them and beat Minnesota. That was the whiteout game, I believe, right?
Yeah, it was the
Last year?
whiteout. Honestly, I didn't even remember that that's when they wore them last year. I think that's because it was also the whiteout, and you're kind of fixed
Yeah.
on the whiteout rather than the uniforms. But I the 2020 game is just it was a weird one, right? Like, there was a weird year. That was when Sean Clifford was in the game, he was out of the game, he was in the
Is that
game.
because I
Like,
was gonna say, I literally, like, I don't think I remember anything about that game. I mean, there are very few things I remember about that season in general.
yeah, again, another time period that I just completely blocked out of my memory, probably for the sake of my own health. But no, I do think like this is listen, if anyone's getting like ominous feelings about, oh no, they're wearing the uniforms, they're gonna lose. They're not. I promise. Like this
Yeah.
is if they lose to UMass, I don't want to promise like that I'm gonna eat a shoe or anything like that. But
You're
for some
eating a
perspective,
Jordan.
yeah, I would not be doing that. Don't want to waste a good Jordan. Uh, UMass is 124th in SP Plus, NESPN's SP Plus, created by Bill Connolly. 132nd in defense. Just a spoiler alert: there are 133 FBS teams. Defense is not good, so this is going to be a blowout for Penn State. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves with the UMass talk, James did speak today. He talked about a lot. Talked about the status of Trey Wallace, which still seems like he's trending toward coming back. Mentioned that JB Nelson, he had no status update, which I mean, I'm assuming you sort of got the same implication that he is not out for the season based on that because he
He
says
would
to us
tell
when
us if
guys
he
are out for the
was,
season.
right? I think that's
Right.
the yeah,
Yeah.
I think.
And so those were two of the main points. Of course, we have all seen the tweets and everything about the video of the question that was asked by a reporter about the kind of the passing game and taking deep shots there and maybe forcing some long passes. I think the general idea of what the reporter was getting at there was that they're like just taking shots for the sake of taking shots to trust the receivers, and I
Right,
actually
'cause
followed
the
up.
the offense hasn't been explosive enough, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's the premise,
Yes.
and that's correct, right? We haven't seen the explosive element. That's something that I'm sure during self-scout, the bye week, they wanted to hit on that. But go ahead.
Had to be. But no, and then I followed up later by asking about the importance of this connection with the receivers and like kind of the trust that's in there too. Because this isn't just about like, okay, a guy's open, I got to throw him the ball. It's as a guy 85% open, and if you lead him to a spot, he is wide open, and then you can throw it there. I think that is more the the issue here. And James mentioned that a lot of that was, and he said it multiple times, was about Trey Wallace not being out, right? And this is something I think you and I had discussed
We've
last week.
talked about it. I
That
wrote about it in my mailbag on The Athletic. I know you've written about it
yeah,
at centerdaily.com. Like, I think anybody who follows this team closely knows how much they were hyping up Trey Wallace, right? All off season, all spring, all summer. Like, every time we heard about the receiving core and the questions, James Franklin always said, well, we have Keandre Lambert Smith and we also have Trey Wallace. Like, they felt these are their two best receivers. It's clear, it's solidified. And yeah, like he's going to be, I think, that big play threat. Remember, his vertical is crazy. Like, he was the
yeah,
guy back in the spring who like touched up and jumped and hit the spot in the weight room. If you remember, that was like a thing during spring ball. Um, so I think yeah, like that's part of it. But James Franklin did not like the question about which the premise was, trying to just take shots downfield for the sake of taking shots, and it's one of those things where like, there are, gosh, I don't know, maybe 15 questions on a Tuesday, right? Sometimes you
yeah. That
never
sounds about
know,
right.
right? Like, you never
Yeah,
know how he's gonna take a question. We've all, as reporters, we've all been there where there's a question that in our mind sounds one way, then we say it, it comes out a different way. We've all been on the other end of those moments. But yeah, I think the point stands that we need to see them push the ball down the field. We need to see them take those deep shots. Because again, like, you're not going to have to do it against UMass to win, but there are going to be games where we're going to need to see Drew Allar air it out. And I think that's something that he can do and that he's going to do really well. We just haven't seen it or haven't
well, and
seen
I
enough of
wonder.
it.
Yeah, I wonder if the Trey Wallace aspect of this, and James did say that, to my question that, it's him coming back helps Keandre Lambert Smith, helps the rest of the room. And I wonder, I think at least that part of that is, Trey Wallace maybe isn't going to be on the receiving end of these deep shots, but maybe all of those routes that Keandre's running, right? Like all the
Mhm.
intermediate routes, all of the safer routes where you want to get one of your guys you trust into a space where you can trust that Drew can get the ball to. Maybe Trey Wallace is going to run those routes, and it's going to be Keandre running those deeper routes with that someone like Dante Cephas is currently running. Right? That it's not that Trey Wallace is actually going to just be on the receiving end of those. It's that Keandre is going to be, and he's, I mean, probably their fastest wide receiver. He is, one of the best athletes on the team for my money. Like he's just unbelievably
And
explosive.
John's got a lot of money as evidenced by his shoe collection.
Yeah, that's well, I think that's probably evidence that I don't have as much as I should. Uh, but no, I think this is a chance for Keandre to kind of get back into that rhythm, right, and be that kind of player that we saw that he was at the start of the year, the West Virginia game included there. So I think Trey coming back is less about Trey and more about what he opens up for everybody else. I think he has a chance to be their most consistent receiver, like in that like 7 catches for
Mhm.
65 to 85 yards every game, the guy that Drew Allar trusts on 3rd and 7, you know what I mean, to run an 8 yard out and to get to a spot and to be there on time and to be on the same page. So I think like that is going to help quite a bit. And that's going to be important in opening everything up because I hate to go down this rabbit hole. We talked about it last week. I wrote about it in my good, bad, ugly column where I was reviewing the first half film, the first half of the season film, if you will. But it's not necessarily about, okay, they're not getting explosive runs because the running game's not there. Well, part of that is defenses are playing closer to the line of scrimmage.
Mhm.
Why do you fix that? You take more shots downfield. Well, how do you get more shots downfield? By having guys open underneath that defensive backs have to step up on. So once A happens, then B happens, then C happens, and then all of a sudden you can get explosive runs because teams are forced to play back a little bit further because there are more shots downfield because Keandre is getting open 30 yards past the line of scrimmage. And so you don't like it's I have a we talked about this after the Northwestern game. I have a tough time allocating blame for what's going on with this offense because I think some of it is stuff that we're just not going to know, right?
Mhm.
Because of its internal
They
stuff
just
with decision
they haven't
making.
done it yet. It's and again, the
Yeah,
personnel's limited. Like, to me, that's the part about this that you have to keep in mind, right? It's about how how defenses have played them, but it's also about the personnel, and they haven't had it. Last week, you had dubbed this the Dante Cephas get right
yes.
game. Do you still feel that way, John? Is this the week to get Cephas rolling, or are you backpedaling now?
No, I still think this is the week where you
Mhm.
get him maybe 6 or 7 targets. You know what I mean? Let you try and establish him as the clear third guy because I don't like I know Trey Wallace is coming back and they probably want to get him targets. I don't
Or
know
so
that you
we
have.
think, right? So we think.
Yeah, right. I don't want to say he's definitely coming back and then watch him not play against UMass, but
We'll see
James,
the availability report like everyone else.
yes.
Yeah.
But James intimated and said as much last Wednesday that he was going to play against Northwestern.
Mhm.
Said somebody stepped on it. To
Got
me,
tweaked.
the only things that get stepped on are like feet and ankles, right? Like in
There's a
legs.
lot of body
You
parts can
know,
get stepped on. I
I know,
listen,
but like,
as someone
but
who jumped off the couch too abruptly the other
no,
night
we
after
don't.
the
We
Austin
aren't doing
Riley
this.
home run,
We're not
tweaked their
doing
back,
this.
there's a lot of ways
I will.
people can get hurt.
Let me
Just
try and
saying.
figure out how to close the podcast now and end it forever. But no, I think this is odds are that Trey Wallace is going to play, right?
Yeah.
It seems trending in that direction at the
Trending there,
very
yeah.
least. And you kind of want to get him out there to get him reacclimated to game speed. I think more than anything, you don't necessarily have to heavily involve him if that trust is already there between him and Drew Allar.
Mhm.
This doesn't have to be okay. Trey Wallace gets 10 targets, because you know what you're going to get. You just go let him run his stuff. It is a chance for that third receiver to step up, though. And I still think Cephas is that guy that you want to do it. Based on what James said today, I don't know if they see him as maybe like a 2A tier above the rest of the guys right now, like maybe I do, right? Like I think, the based on the way that he answered the
You're
question, it was
drawing
more about
circles around Cephas on the depth chart, you're drawing hearts, and you're
yeah.
yeah.
Listen, I think
Swooning over Cephas, that's gonna be a
listen,
student section sign. Swooning
he's
over
he's
Cephas.
He's very good. He's very good at Kent State, and I think he's going to be very good by the end of this year. But James made it more about Trey Wallace and Keandre Lambert-Smith,
Yeah.
right, than the other group of guys, which is fair. And they've proven it more. They are the two best. But I think that Cephas at this point is 2A with a group of 2B behind him, with those guys being 1A and 1B. And so I do think this is an opportunity to get him the ball. It doesn't have to be downfield. It can be some of those intermediate plays. It could be little bubble screens just to get him the
Mhm.
ball and let him make things happen in space. And frankly, like even if Trey Wallace is feeling any side effects or whatever, like or the main issue is still a little bit of an issue, you don't want to run him out there for a full snap load and risk what happened before the Northwestern
Well,
game where
this
suddenly he
is
couldn't play then.
I think this was a really good point that James Franklin made today, and this is something that's been in the back of my mind last week, this week. He said, yes, like the bye week, the idle week was great to get guys healthy and rest, but also you want to come out of this game as healthy as possible, knowing what's on the other side, right? So they've done a great job. They've been in a really good situation with snap counts where they've been able to manage that. Um, but I think you keep that in mind, right? Like if you have a guy who is maybe like he's good enough to play, but maybe not good enough to be as effective as always. You do not need to play that guy, whoever that person is, unnamed person. You don't need to play that person against UMass, right? If it's a situation with JB Nelson, and again, we do not know this. We just know that it's not season ending based off of what we've been told so far. Like if you have a guy like that, you don't need to play them against UMass, right? Use that
If
extra
there's
week.
any chance of re-injury, like there's no need.
I mean, every time you step on the field, there's a chance of getting hurt, right? Like there's that, right?
For sure.
That's the game. But I think you have to be really smart with it. I think this might be one of those games, John, where we say, okay, how long does Drew Allar play? They've done a really nice job with managing that. At what point does he exit? Probably in the third quarter would be my guess. A lot of Bo Prabula this weekend,
I've
I
got
would
a
think.
I've got a hot take on that front that we can get to later. So
Um,
stick around because I'll get there.
oh boy, because I mean, I think that's all these things you have to manage, because that's so much of next week, and everything is building toward Ohio State as it's been all off season, right? Like next week, we will all kind of be in the bunker, working all week, getting ready for the game. You and I will be driving out to Columbus early in the or earlier, like than usual. So it's going to be a busy, crazy week, but this is your chance to get right before you get to Columbus. As we all saw this weekend, as I've been writing about, Ohio State in that first half, they're not world
That was a
beaters,
tough watch.
right?
I
Like they're
listen.
not.
I got
I
to
don't want to
be in
jump
my
too far
bunker.
ahead, but we had a
Yeah,
Saturday to watch football, and I think it's really notable that this is a program that we're used to seeing roll out Heisman Trophy contender after Heisman Trophy contender, especially at quarterback, and it's different this year.
yeah. I was down in my bunker with 4 TVs watching as much college football as I could. We finally got a bye week. You know what I mean. I wanted to
Gotta
soak
enjoy
it
it.
in. That game was on the main TV though because I was curious because one, it's work related, right? Like I wanted to watch that game to help inform myself further. But you're right. Like on some level, it's not too dissimilar from Penn State's game against Northwestern, right? Like it's a game where
Right.
they maybe don't look as good early and they pull away late. But on another level, they definitely have questions at quarterback.
Mhm.
That is definitely an issue. And they also play Purdue this weekend. That is not they go to Purdue, like which has been a
Trap
house of
game,
horrors
baby.
for yeah,
Yep.
that's a house of
Spoiler
horrors for
alert
Ohio
central.
State
Mhm.
and has been for years. Like Rondale Moore, I remember when he, was the one like making life miserable for Ohio State a few years ago. But no, I think it's working out well for Penn State. They're going to benefit, I think, from scheduling more, and that's what part of this is. Like having this UMass game now is the benefit of scheduling a an easy team. Like I know, again, they don't want to talk about teams as if they're bad or anything like
But we
that, but
can.
yeah, we can, and UMass is pretty bad. But scheduling this type of opponent is right up James Franklin's alley, right? Like this is what they want to do. He said as much today when Johnny McGonigal of Penn Live, friend of the podcast, asked about the non-conference scheduling and how maybe that's changing with
Mhm.
how teams are handling it moving forward. And James pretty much said they want to keep scheduling games that are wins because the highest priority is to give yourself the highest probability you can of going undefeated. And he said
Yep.
maybe that changes a little bit with the playoff expanding, but I still can't imagine. I'm with him on this. I can't imagine it changing all that much. You should still be trying to get to 11 wins, right, at minimum. Because right now,
Yeah.
11 seems like the bare minimum to get in. And in the future, it could be, maybe 10 gets you in. But we talked
Yeah.
about that conference scheduling last week, and there might be
It
two
won't be
losses in there.
easy. No,
Yeah.
and I think that's the whole beauty and curse of blessing and curse of this new look Big Ten that we're gonna get next year. Um, the blessing is that you don't need to schedule difficult non-conference games. The curse is that you are going to have a loaded schedule sometimes, like we see with Penn State in 2024. Now, James Franklin, without naming names, said that there was one team in the Big Ten Conference that's worked to get out of future games, future contract agreements, which, of course,
Yeah,
that would
clearly talking
Ohio
about
State.
Indiana taking out the Louisville game, right? That
Oh,
was
I'm sure, yeah. Ohio State got rid of playing Washington, of course, before we found out that Washington was going to join the Big Ten. James Franklin
Michigan
was
did the same with
asked,
UCLA for what it's worth.
yes,
So like,
there's your top tier programs. Again, now James Franklin was asked if essentially they would be buying out of any future games, which my head right away jumps to West Virginia next year. Um, he didn't really seem to address that part of the question head on. I mean, I don't think they will, but it was kind of obviously like I think that's a question now that we need to save for Pat Kraft when we ask about scheduling. We talk with him down the road. But yeah, that's the other side of this, right? Like we heard about it last year at Auburn after Penn State wins that game. Fans take over an SEC stadium. Penn State fans are like having the time of their lives, and James Franklin's like essentially without saying it, he's like, "Yeah, enjoy this because we're not doing this again."
yeah.
That's just where we're at in college football. That's where we're at with scheduling. Now,
Well, and
strategically, the
frankly,
timing of this game is
I think
great if you're
real
Penn State.
quick, you
Go
can
ahead.
be there because if you're a 5 to 8 seed in the future
Mhm.
playoff, you're going to get a home game against one of those
Right.
teams like late in the year. Like, so it's not going to matter as much.
No, and that's the point, right? It's like you always have to do what you can to get your team geared up for the postseason. You want to be playing your best football heading into what will be the expanded field next year. But before we go too far down the future rabbit hole, because we've got a long season,
Yes, we
um,
do.
someone else's future I wanted to get to here because it's October 10th, John. That means we are getting near coaching carousel season. Speaking of games
Audrey,
on Saturday
we've
that we
already
watch,
been there. There are
that's
2
true.
Big Ten
Yeah,
openings already.
yeah, that's right. So someone's already calling about the Michigan State job. It's Saturday night, late. I was not in the best place after my baseball team had a rough outing. Was not in the best headspace,
I
but I
again,
was
still don't wanna
I was
discuss this.
watching I was watching Miami, and you and I were texting after this game with some other friends,
Yes.
and you made a point about Miami that I thought was really interesting. John, would you care to share that point with the group, or am I just putting you on the spot?
No, I think this is fair because I've said
Mhm.
this to anyone who would listen, which, I mean, everyone knows I like to
Captive
talk a lot.
audience now, floor is yours.
Yeah, now you're trapped here. But I said, "Is there anyone happier than Manny Diaz right now?" Right? After
Mhm.
Mario Cristobal had just I don't I don't know if I have the words to do it justice, just
I don't.
how incompetent the decision making was on Saturday
Mhm.
night, and to have been in a similar situation in the past, when Mario
Yes.
Cristobal was at Oregon, and have it happen again. Essentially, for those of you who are not aware of one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life, something that I watched, and again, I was in my bunker by myself, laughing very loudly. I could not believe what was happening. So Miami has the ball, third down, less than 40 seconds left. Georgia Tech's out of timeouts. Again, this is not a very good Georgia Tech team either. Miami just has to knee it. The game's over. There's nothing Georgia Tech can do. They do not have timeouts. There's no means to stop the clock at this point. Miami is winning, mind you. I think it was 20-17. And so what does Miami do? They run the ball, and then a fumble is forced because, of course, it was, because this is, I don't know if, like, if you need proof of karma, that might be it, because that is, like, the ball was out.
The
Georgia Tech
football gods are
recovers.
offended that you didn't
Yes.
take a knee. Yes.
And then 24 seconds later, Georgia Tech scored the game-winning touchdown when a receiver got behind the secondary. Don't know how that happens other than, and
Wide
honestly,
open.
I don't even know if I blame the defense for that, because I would be in so much shock by what the coaching staff just did to ruin a win
Yes.
that I don't know if I'd be ready to go out there and play either. There were some
Oh, the
videos of guys on the
sideline shots
sideline
were yeah.
with, like, guys just being, like, in
What
disbelief.
yeah,
It looked
what
like
in
an
the F are we
analyst.
doing? Yeah, a lot of those.
Yes, it said 4 times in a row, which
Mhm.
I may have also been saying, but instead of "we," it was a "they," again,
Oh,
while laughing. But it's just, and I don't blame the kid for fumbling. His coaches put him in that position, to be clear, like, it is
oh,
not on the running
totally
back
on
for fumbling there.
Cristobal. Yeah, you
Yeah, it's
don't you
on
don't do that
Cristobal.
under any situation. Like, to me, that is,
When it looked
you
like his
know
analyst came up to him and tried to tell him to knee it, and then he ignored him. Like, just, and
John,
again, we don't know that, but
we've
based on
got
the video, it's what it looked like.
expanding staff sizes, right? You've got how many analysts in the building? Mario Cristobal's making how much money? And you do
Yeah.
that, right? Like, so again, Manny Diaz picked up a win this weekend without
Yes,
having
he
to
did.
play a game, without having to coach a game.
Yeah,
To
and
me,
Manny
that
Diaz,
was
who for
just
again, for
egregious.
those not as informed, got a bit of a raw deal when he got let go by Miami. It seemed like that Miami was targeting Cristobal while Miami was
Mhm.
while Diaz was still the head coach and was
Out
essentially
recruiting, doing
talking.
this job, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so, like, probably, I don't want to speak for Manny or anything like that. Imagine he had a smile on his face Saturday night when he was watching some college football. That's all.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's always we always hear James Franklin say that they bring up, teachable moments, right? They're watching games, whether it be Saturday, Sunday, an NFL game Monday night. Teachable moments. Yeah, I think there's a big old teachable moment there,
Well, clearly it's
but
not
that's for a
because, well,
coaching staff,
For
right? Well,
Cristobal,
for
it's not
other
though,
teams,
because I was gonna say, because it's
he
the
just doesn't
second
keep doing it.
time.
Oh, yeah,
When
no, for Cristobal, that's a lost cause, like, that is
unbelievable,
oh my gosh, like, I
genuinely
insane,
unbelievable. I
but
was I don't know that I had said that I didn't think it had ever happened, because when it happened at Oregon in 2018,
Mhm,
there was, like, this window where there might have been, like, an extra 6 seconds, but you can run around, like, and extend a play out a little bit to take care
right.
of, like, 3 seconds on one play, 3 seconds on another, boom, the game's over. That game, it was CJ Verdell who fumbled for Oregon, and then Stanford went on to win, I think, in overtime after kicking a game-tying field goal to end it in regulation, or not to end it regulation, to end regulation. But 5 years later, like, just it's just really, honestly, one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. I can't stress enough how hard I was laughing. It was it was one of the most unbelievable things that you could watch
It
in college football.
was
It was like I was
definitely a
playing
low
Madden.
light. A low
Yeah.
light for the highlight reel for Mario Cristobal, and I think this brings us to the
Well, real quick,
carousel, John.
the one thing it reminded me of was when you're playing, like, when you were playing NCAA 14 or Madden and your, like, running back needs, like, 3 yards for 100 rushing
Oh,
yards, you're
yeah.
like, I'll get him. Let's get him over 100." And, like, I make that decision because it's a video game, and people make that deci but in real life, with
Th
however much is on the line, it's just incredible.
Maybe that's the thing, maybe Mario Cristobal thought he was playing a video game and didn't this is just a simulation, he wasn't sure.
Running a little
Um
spread HD.
It's just insanity, but I asked James Franklin, Tuesday about Manny Diaz and just kind of to go back to the hiring process, right? Because everything is worked out as good as, probably better, right, than expected with this defense, with Manny, because that's a story that I'm working on, so I wanted to get that quote before Ohio State week and gets too crazy, but one of the things he did say, which I thought was really interesting, was that he's like, "Yeah, I actually felt kinda bad calling him because like, it was right after the day that he had gotten fired that James Franklin, reached out through point of contact to first talk to Manny Diaz," but yeah, his name is going to come up. Manny Diaz, that is. I don't want to get anything crazy started on this podcast. Manny Diaz's name, I'm sure, is going to come. We don't need this. We've gone through this many, many years.
Yes. I
Um,
don't think, and by the way, for what it's worth, I don't think we're gonna be going through it this year, which is less stressful for us.
oh yeah, no, no, Jeff, I would be stunned if it happens.
Yeah,
But we're not giving legs to things that don't exist here, John, on the Nittany
correct.
Dispatch. But yeah, Manny Diaz, I think we're gonna see his name come up, as it should. Now, one of the things that I got asked in my mailbag over the weekend at The Athletic, one of the things that we get asked a lot is Manny Diaz gonna be back next year? Logic would tell me no, but the caveat to that is we don't know every job that's going to open. We don't know what's on Manny Diaz's lists of what he wants in a job, what he doesn't want in a job. That's all stuff that like it's hard to parse through. What we do know, and something that he's been really forward with since he got here, is that he wants to be a head coach again, right? So Penn State, because I'll hear from fans all the time. Well, Penn State just pay him more money, and you'll keep him. Like that's not how this works, right? There are only so many head coaching jobs in America. If he really wants one of those jobs, if he gets the opportunity to interview for one of those jobs, if he's interested in one of those jobs, and then is offered one of those jobs, then we will go down kind of that path, that rabbit hole. But it's gone as good as possible, better than probably it could have expected for Penn State. And just in my reporting for this story that I'm working on for next week, I've heard some interesting things. I don't want to spoil the story, but interesting things from Penn State players about kind of finding their place in this defense. And you and I talked last week, John, about Manny Diaz saying that if they feel like they're starting to find the soul of this defense. To me, that's kind of a recipe that good defenses can go on the road, right? Like that
Yep.
travels, it travels well. So again, something that we'll be monitoring, but obviously Penn State has a really good showing against Ohio State defensively, against Michigan defensively. I think then this conversation hits another stratosphere with
Yeah.
Manny Diaz, but especially like it's already his name we're starting to see circulate out there anyway.
Yeah, and to go back to what you said about how he's kind of handled these situations, back on media day, he told me the quote from him when I asked him about like other jobs was being the defensive coordinator at Penn State is a better job than being the head coach at a lot of different schools. So he has the
And then you followed up and said, "Manny, can you name all those other schools, please?" Could you
but he has
imagine if a coach actually did that?
that would be fun. I would
It'd
enjoy
be
it a lot.
career
Coaches should do
suicide, but
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, coaches should be very transparent. I always stand by that. But no, I think he has the privilege of being selective, right? Because he's
Mhm,
in a
yep.
good job where he is well compensated, right? Like this is a high level job in
I
college
bet you he has
football.
more pairs of sneakers than you if he wanted.
If he wanted,
Yeah.
he could absolutely have more pairs of sneakers than me, and probably not deal with any repercussions for it either. Uh, but the thing that I get hung up on is with where football in general is trending,
Mhm.
it is harder for defensive coordinators to get hired, right? Like they just don't get like because a lot of times, another name that you're hearing a lot is Sean Lewis from Colorado,
Yep.
the offensive coordinator there. He was the head coach at Toledo previously and took the job to
Mhm.
follow or to go with Deion Sanders at Colorado. You hear the offensive names all the time because the sport is oriented toward the offense at this point, right? Like it is about scoring points. It's about outpacing your team rather than holding them to a smaller number. But I think what sets Manny Diaz apart, and you'll get into this in your story, is the main job of a head coach is to be the CEO of the program and to be the leader of the
Mhm.
program. It's one of the reasons that Nick Saban has been so good for so long. Yes, he's great at coaching defensive backs. He's even better at managing a room and managing a locker room.
And apparently
And
he coaches them hard too, as we're finding out
yes,
this year.
but
That's been
but
a storyline.
yes, but Manny Diaz is well liked by his players. They
Mhm.
feel like
Really well liked.
there have been some quotes about him that make you laugh, and it's like these guys just clearly feel comfortable saying anything because they trust him and they trust what he's done and they trust the way that he implements defense and they trust everything kind of that he does as part of his process. And that
Mhm.
is arguably the most important part of being a head coach. I think it is I think it's going to be really interesting because there are jobs that maybe we thought would have opened. Like I think everyone thought West Virginia was going to open when now
Right.
West
Right.
Virginia is playing decently well, and that could have been a nice regional place. But it's tough to say. Like you said, they're not a ton of jobs that come open every year. Michigan State is open right now. Northwestern is open right now. We have no idea where those directions are going to go. It's still too early. I'm sure those processes have started, or at least on the verge of starting. But it's October 10th, like you said, right? Like it's impossible to know what is going to be open, what he's going to have interest in, because I tend to believe coaches when they say this, especially this early in the year. I'm guessing his focus is on this team and not what comes next for him, because he should have enough opportunities that he can focus on that in early December when that time comes. And I would be surprised if he doesn't, like if he couldn't get a job. He doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a desirable one, but I think he's going to have offers. It's just about sort of sussing out what is worth leaving for. Maybe that's after this year. Maybe it's after next year, right? It's tough to say when that time
Yeah,
will come.
you gotta see, one of the things I will say, and then this is just from, like, interacting with him in our media settings, like, I would be stunned if the man does not interview well because he
Oh
knocks it out
yeah,
of the park with us, right? Like,
yes,
he knows how to play the game, how to, hit on the coaching points, like, it feels very, and again, this is just my, I can't quantify this is just gut feel. It feels very genuine when he talks, right?
yeah,
Like, you feel
and
the
it's
emotion, you feel
informative
the
too.
passion. Yes, and I like, there's just he's a really interesting guy I've found to cover. There's just seemingly so many layers there, but it's been a perfect fit for Penn State, a perfect marriage. And kudos to James Franklin for that, because at that point, I'm sure there were a lot of other teams that would have loved to have had Manny Diaz, as kind of he goes through this really tough part in his career. But, are we ready to switch gears to UMass, John? We're not gonna bore
Yeah,
all of our
I
loyal
can.
listeners of the
That's right.
Nittany Dispatch with, too much UMass talk, but are we ready to do it?
Yeah, and I think it's fair for me to fire off the hot take now at the front end.
Oh boy.
I think Bo Prabula is going to be in this game in the second quarter. Like this is an atrocious UMass
Mhm.
defense. James Franklin
Say
talked a
that
lot
to
about.
Don Brown's face, John.
Yeah, well, listen, man, it's not. I don't even think it's Don Brown's fault. Sometimes, like
Well, we did,
you
yeah,
just don't have the talent.
did you
Uh,
catch, James Franklin when he did say today he spoke about his relationship with Don
yeah,
Brown, and yeah, very
yeah,
complimentary, so when John says
yeah,
this, we're gonna
yeah. James also talked about how good Tyson Pumachan is at
mhm.
quarterback, and I believe that to be true as well. He talked about Anthony Simpson at wide receiver. They have a ton of explosive plays, super explosive offense. This defense gets torched regularly. It is really, really bad. Penn State is going to light it up. Like I'm talking, this could be 42 to nothing at halftime, and I would not be surprised. This game could get into
Spread
seven
is what's the spread?
forty
It's
42 and a
fluctuating.
half. I believe it's
Okay.
42 and a half now. The over under was, I think, 55 and a half last I checked. Not good for UMass. Does not bode well for their chances. But like you look at some of the games earlier this year, they gave up 52 to Arkansas State. They gave up 59 to Auburn. Like these are offenses that Penn State kind of blows out of the water, right? Auburn is 50th in SP plus, Penn State is 29th, like, and they gave up 50 plus to them. I said we were talking before the podcast about getting our predictions in order and everything, and I might have to waffle off of what I said there because this is like,
Uh-oh.
yeah, we're talking this game, like I said, might be 42 to nothing at halftime, and might even be like when Prbula comes in, like they're still lighting them up. I
So the bold take is that we see Bo Prabula Not in a Bo Prabula package because this is not the week
No,
to earn that, but we see Bo Prabula as QB1
in the second
starting
quarter.
in the second quarter.
Yes, and it might be with,
I'm
like,
gonna hold you
3
to
minutes
it.
left in this. Yeah, no, I think, like,
Yeah.
Penn State should score every time they touch the ball, and that's if Jackson Smolik is at quarterback. They're too good athletically on the outside. Their tight ends are too good. Their running game, everyone might treat this as a big breakout game for the running backs, when it might actually be, but it's gonna be one of those situations where you actually have to watch and see if things are different or if it's just like, "Oh, they're better than UMass, so they're taking advantage of it." Now I don't like the Penn State defense is so good that they could probably shut out
Yeah.
this UMass team. I do think UMass is explosive enough though to make some things happen on that end. Even if their offense is also ranked 100th in SP plus, they're explosive enough that I think they could catch Penn State. Maybe not like Delaware did, which was still one of the wildest plays that I've seen all year that they scored a touchdown on. But I do think that UMass could catch them once, maybe twice when the backups are in the second half.
John, you forgot about the most important number about this game.
No, we already talked about the spread.
No. UMass will be getting paid 1.6 million to
Yes,
come here and get it handed to him most
just
likely.
get destroyed.
I FOIA'd the game contract from UMass months ago. The agreement was made the 20th day of December 2018. So they will be getting 1.6 mil for coming here. I shouldn't say love. I look at game contracts. There's always some kind of quirks in there about
They're
number of
fascinating.
tickets that they should get. The visiting school should have the option of purchasing up to 2,000 tickets from the home school. So we will see if how many UMass fans travel to this game. I don't know, but there is it's a cool moment for many of those people on the other side of this, right? Big game for Adam Brenneman, right?
Yeah,
Matt
the
Zanolato.
Adam Brenneman game, some would say.
I believe Matt is still at UMass, former Penn State wide receiver. So I mean, there are a couple ties over there, but not a ton. But for me, it's going back to what James Franklin said, right? Coming out of this game healthy, because let's be honest, as soon as that game ends, soon as the alma mater plays, you know what we'll be asking about in that post game press conference, John?
Ohio State. It's all
Yeah,
Ohio State.
uh, it might sound harsh because I'm sure there are going to be some really good feel good moments for Penn State, right? Like maybe these guys that are farther down on the depth chart, maybe they get their moment. Like that's great and all of that, but the clock keeps ticking. The race to
It may
Ohio
as well
State
be
is
Ohio
on.
State week already.
It does. It feels like we're getting a week of that, or an extra week
Yeah.
of that. But you know what? Like that's the name of the game. We all know Ohio State, Michigan. Those are the games that fans have had circled on their calendar for the past year. We know in the building I'm sure feel the same way, even though it's their job to not lose sight of the game this weekend.
And
Um,
honestly, I'm sure they won't because it is a game that they have to win. Like it's not, you know what I
oh
mean?
yeah,
Like if you're not
yeah, oh yeah.
focused, people always talk about the like, oh, you can lose if you're not focused. No, you can get hurt. Like it is a
Hmm.
violent sport. And if you're not like fully into what you're doing in that moment, you can get yourself hurt very easily. So I don't really like the trap game thing. I don't think is necessarily about like guys weren't focused or didn't care. I think it's more the other external stuff that maybe they put too much pressure on themselves, because it is supposed to be an easy game or what have you. But yeah, I think like they're going to be fully focused for UMass, like you said, but everyone's kind of got that
You
eye
know,
forward.
and I think the one of the things that Drew Allar said, I believe it was maybe preseason or maybe like week 1, week 2, he made the comment, which I thought was a really good one. He was like, essentially we only get like 12 opportunities, usually 13, right, with the bowl game, to play this game. Like you spend most of the year training behind the scenes, doing all this stuff. You want to savor the moments in the stadium. So, for us, it's UMass, it's homecoming, it's a dud of a game most likely. But again, you only get so many opportunities to do this during your college career. So many opportunities to play in front of your home crowd. So I do get it. Gosh, I'm also sitting here thinking about. Can't wait to look at the snap counts on Sunday because that is going to be a
Yep.
wild ride.
Over
Remember,
under
like,
over under
okay,
25 and a half snaps for Olu.
ooh, that is a great question. I
Puts him at like two and a half
I would
sacks.
say I would say over, but not by much. Like
Mm,
I think he probably comes out with like 30, 33 snaps.
I don't know that he like plays after the first quarter. like I like
That is a really good over under. Yeah.
because
That's
they might they again
because
I
you
said
don't need
42 nothing
to.
at halftime. It might be like 28-0 at the end of the first quarter if they touch the ball 4 times. This is like there is I would argue there is just as much blowout potential here as there was for the Delaware game.
Oh, for
And
sure.
UMass might catch them, like I said, because of the explosive offense. Another guy I didn't mention, by the way, Kaytron Adams, who's a
Mhm.
very good running back and has had a good year, but just like this defense has been too good to give up too much. And if they're by the way, if they're getting explosive plays, they're probably taking shots downfield. I have not looked at Tyson Pumachan's air yards per attempt, but I imagine it's probably high. You're also putting the ball in the air and giving those DBs a chance to make a play on it. So I think there could be some
And
real opportunities for some fun defense for Penn State.
who was the recipient of James Franklin's unprompted praise this week so far?
Johnny Dixon, I thought this
Quarterback
was
Johnny
very
Dixon.
interesting.
Int
Yeah,
yeah.
usually you can read between the lines with some stuff. I just think like that Johnny Dixon's probably been really good because he is
He
he's
felt
been
like, as a whole, we're not writing enough about Johnny
yeah.
Dixon, and one of the things, and I mean, I remember going back to the spring when Terry Smith said it, like, they feel really, really strongly about Johnny Dixon. I know I've written about it. I know you've written about it. I know we've talked about it. Um, but it's just as important when you have that shutdown corner that you have in Kalen King, that you have somebody really good opposite him. Kalen even said to us earlier this year, he's like, yeah, I feel like I'm in that Joey Porter type role last year where they're not going to target me a ton. So it's on Johnny to step up. And so far he has. Now, is that maybe just a public boost of confidence before you go to Columbus? I don't know. I mean, I do believe, like, they are genuinely confident in Johnny Dixon,
Yeah,
and they should be,
as
but
they
the
should be.
timing of it to me is like, maybe this is, like, to get ahead. I don't know. Maybe you just wanna plant
Yeah,
that seed if you're a head coach, hit all the right buttons. I don't know.
yeah, I think we've talked about in the past. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka are awesome, and you
Yeah.
you need those
Really,
guys
really good.
to be the most confident they can going into that game, because you need them playing at their absolute best this season. That is the biggest test for these defensive backs this year because it is the biggest test for any defensive back combo in the
Oh,
country
yeah.
in college football. Those
Absolute
are
studs.
arguably the two best receivers in college football, not the best tandem,
Mhm.
number one and number
And number
two
2.
in the entire sports. Like that's it. You can argue for Malik Neighbors at LSU, but like to me, it's like Buka and Harrison. So I think that they need those guys to be at their best, and honestly, I think they will be. Again, don't want to put the cart before the horse here, but I am very excited to break down that game next week. It's going to be a lot of fun.
We're gonna have a
Very
full we're
very
gonna
fun
have a
matchup.
full week. Obviously, John and I will have our UMass episode for you by Sunday morning. So we'll get out of there Saturday, record, get that to your feeds by Sunday morning, and then next week we will be back with our full Ohio State preview. John, I've got for Saturday, I've got Penn State 50, UMass 10, because everybody's got to get some garbage time points. I say we see Drew Allar into early in the third quarter. So you're jumping the gun there, which you very
That's right.
well could be correct, but I just want to make sure we're on the record. Penn State 50, UMass 10. What do you got?
Yeah, so before this, I told you that I was leaning toward 56-13, and it just doesn't feel like enough now that we've talked through a little bit. I'm
Oof.
going 63-7 with the 7 coming in garbage time, and I will say that it is 42-0 at halftime. Like I think, like I said, if they touch the ball 6 times in the first half, I would expect them to score touchdowns 6 times, and which is essentially what that prediction is, right? They should really be able to have that kind of offensive game that people want to see out of them, and give them a really good chance to carry some momentum. Like I said, Bo Prabula second quarter, I think is very much on the table. Dante Cephas could be in for a nice game. Also going to be a really good chance for a lot of those receivers to get second half reps
Mhm.
with Prabula. When I assume they're still going to be throwing the ball because it matters. Like
Well, and
UMass
we're gonna
probably
see
have their
that receiving core, like, we're gonna see that deep
all of it.
rotation, right? Like, to me, that's exciting because, like, again, there's a lot there that, for these games, it's about this year for sure, but also next year, right? Like, well, I don't know
You
what
got
that
to,
receiving core is gonna look like next year, and I think that's the feel for a lot of these spots, right? Like, you always have to have an eye toward the future
yeah,
and toward
no,
Ohio State.
right. No, well, that's our duty here, and we will continue to look forward to Ohio State, for what should be a fun trip next week. Like you said, you and
Yes.
I are going out Thursday to do some work out there, but I think that's a good place to leave it this week. A rather interesting game Saturday for some maybe unorthodox reasons, mostly to see how correct I was with that hot take, more than
And to
any
get
other.
1 week closer to Ohio State.
That's right. But that'll do it for this week's episode. As always, rate, review, subscribe to this podcast. Do it on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. Please take care of that. That always helps us out. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.